Also, Andrew, it looks like your camera went off. Okay, there you're back. All right. So, Sahaj, let us know when we're up there.
We're live.
Live, perfect. Okay, welcome everyone to 96 Boards Open Hours, sponsored by 96 Boards and Lenaro. I haven't said that in a long time, but yeah. So today is July 12th. My name is Robert Wolf, and I'm usually the one here hosting this podcast. But yeah, today we have a very important guest. Someone I've been following on Instagram for a while, as well as some of the people I know who kind of introduced me to this feed. But Andrew from Disrupt It Yourself, we will be introducing him in just a moment. We're going to give him a whole segment here on the show to talk about all the cool stuff he's working with. But before that, I do need to share some links and just go with some announcements from last week's episode. Is that okay, Andrew? Maybe give me a thumbs up.
Of course, yeah, go ahead.
Excellent. So last week's episode, we met with the folks from Shiratech. Shiratech is a company out of Israel who is building some very cool hardware for the 96 Boards family of boards. And I want to share the link here from last week's episode. It was Ramon and Guy from Shiratech. They showed us some of the cool stuff they're working on, which includes an LTE mezzanine for the 96 Boards family, as well as an FPGA-based Raspberry Pi and Arduino bridge between the 96 Boards and Raspberry Pi Arduino ecosystems. So that will be very interesting. It seems the LTE mezzanine will be coming out later this month, while the FPGA-based Raspberry Pi Arduino bridge will be coming out sometime in August. Now, there will be some announcements coming out later in August, possibly a hackathon for those of you who will be attending Lenaro Connect. One other link I'll be sharing there in just a second. Actually, Sahaj, if you wouldn't mind posting that in there, the Lenaro Connect website. So for anyone who's interested in checking that out. And the last thing I want to share here is two blogs that went out by two of our 96 Boards engineers. Actually, it looks like there's three blogs there. One blog from last week's episode, one blog from some of the great upstream efforts that Mani has been working on. This one is particularly around the MediaTek X20 board. And Sahaj wrote an article on building Yocto for ARM. Or building on ARM Yocto, right? So open embedded Yocto, some cool stuff that you can read up on there. Excellent. Now, who is Disrupt It Yourself? Who is Andrew from Disrupt It Yourself? I'm going to share his Instagram handle right here. So anyone who's interested in checking that out, and we will be posting these links as well in YouTube. So anyone who's watching on YouTube can check out the links in the list there. But this is Disrupt It Yourself, Instagram.com/Disrupt Yourself. Andrew, welcome to Open Hours.
Thank you. I'm glad we were finally able to make this happen.
I know, yeah. So long story short, Andrew and I have been chatting on Instagram for months now. And then finally now, this is the first time I think you and I have ever been on a call together, right?
Yeah. It's been a while coming.
Great. So, it'd be nice if maybe you could take a couple minutes and just like introduce yourself, who you are, and if you're willing to share some information, on a personal level and on a professional level.
Yeah, sure. So I'm 28. I happen to also be a husband and a father. I've got a little almost 4-year-old boy who is very interested in all the crazy stuff I do in my spare time too. But yeah, I'm just someone who has taken kind of a long and winding path to finding the things that I'm passionate about. I happen to have lived in Mexico for a few years, so I'm also fluent in Spanish. But when I got back from Mexico, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for a living, and started, going to college and had no idea what I wanted to study, and started studying business. Took a number of jobs and never really found anything I was passionate about, or to be honest, particularly good at. And really, it's only been in the last 4 or almost 5 years that I've really discovered, or I would say rediscovered, my passion for technology. And I owe a lot of that to Arduino and, companies like Adafruit that were kind of pioneers in that space, that got my feet wet and allowed me, with a really low barrier to entry, to discover kind of that creative, technical side that I had when I was a kid, and I very much feel kind of this renaissance personally for the kind of stuff I loved to do as a kid, which was, create things. When I was little, I had like little notebooks full of drawings of like inventions that I wanted to make. And one of the ones I remember in particular was rollerblades that would shoot bubbles, you know? So um, it's funny, like, I don't know, I kind of just rediscovered it because in high school I was a musician. I wrote songs, played the guitar, and I remember feeling like that was the only thing like I really loved. And until a few years ago, I realized what I loved about music is the same thing that I realized I love about technology, which is just that ability to, discover something in the world, like a need or something that, that I want to accomplish, and then finding a creative way to do that. And it has that same like creative vibe. And I feel like we compartmentalize technology as kind of this cold and boring thing. But the maker world kind of turned me on to this entire other side of technology, which is much more, community driven, much more tactile. And it has that same vibe that I always had in high school when I was playing music with my friends. So yeah, and really the whole Disrupt It Yourself thing has kind of been a few years in the making as well. I just started tinkering with Arduino and Raspberry Pi about 5 years ago and started building little projects. When my son was newborn, I wanted to have some way of checking his temperature without having to spend hundreds of dollars on an infrared thermometer. So I bought a few components and made a little Altoids tin IR thermometer, and that worked really well. And I thought, wow, there wasn't even a tutorial for this. I started to get some confidence, and it's all kind of been from there. A friend of mine recommended that I get a 3D printer shortly after that. And at that point, 3D printers were still, it's crazy to think how far 3D printers have come in just 5 years, because back then it was mostly rep wrap, kind of really clunky looking machines. God bless them, they're kind of the grandfathers of what we love today. And there were only a few decent, more polished looking machines on the market. And I got one and learned a lot because it wasn't everything I wanted it to be, but it allowed me to dig in. And really, I've gone from that point of buying one 3D printer back in like late 2012, early 2013. And now I've got like, I think 6 3D printers and 2 CNC machines all crammed into my little office. So yeah, it's been exciting. And the social media thing has just really driven it off because I meet cool people like you and other makers who are doing similar things or sometimes different, and they inspire me to, try something new every day. And that's really what it's all about. My day job is I work in software QA. So I'm an automation engineer. I'm just really learning to use Python in my day job. But I work with technology, but not hardware as much as I'd like to. So I'm really not an experienced programmer or even electrical engineer, although if I could go back in time, I'm sure that's what I would have studied in college. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, in a big old nutshell.
Yeah. So I can already tell you're going to make this interview very easy on me because your answers are very, detailed. I like this. Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of really interesting things. And, you and I were kind of around the same age group. You're 28, I'm 32. But I remember when the first Raspberry Pi came out and a friend ran up to me. I was in college. I went to college a little late in life, but a friend of mine ran up to me and was like, "Oh my God, you won't believe it. There's this computer. It's the size of a credit card. It can fit in your pocket. And you can do all sides. It boots up a desktop and does all this cool stuff." And I'm like, shut the F up. That's not true. That can't be. There's no way, And so next thing you know, it's sure. Oh, and the catch was it's only $35. And that's where you're like, no way. That's crazy. And so now our kids, well, I don't have any kids, but I hope to one day. Our kids get to enjoy these things and on crazier new levels. And, we're like kind of experiencing this at the first stage, but touched on it. It's amazing to kind of be able to grab this technology, put it in your hands, plug it in and just start making things. So yeah, that's awesome. Awesome story, man. I want to ask one personal thing. Where in Mexico did you live?
I lived in Mexico City, actually.
Okay.
Like,
cool.
Almost in the heart, just south of like the center of Mexico City.
Nice. Yeah. So I also lived in Mexico for quite a while. I was very surprised to see on some of your stories you're speaking Spanish. Yo también puedo hablar español, pero yo soy de nací en Estados Unidos, pero me criaron en Mexico. So like when you see another white American speaking Spanish like all out of nothing, you're like, whoa, what the heck?
Yeah, it surprises people too. I'll go to the store with my 3-year-old and I'll speak Spanish with him and I'll get the weirdest looks like, did that white guy just speak Spanish like a Mexican?
Yeah.
I'll just tell him I'm a white Mexican too, but I don't quite pass because I've got like, green eyes, so it doesn't work.
Yeah, it's I mean, you'd pass almost in Mexico City. There's,
almost, yeah, or in some parts of northern Mexico, there's a lot of lighter skinned people up there.
Yeah. Cool. Well, so I want to remind everyone on the call here, both, what is it? Blue Jeans, YouTube, and Facebook, that if you do have questions, we are monitoring the chats. So please feel free to throw them this way. Our guest is Andrew from Disrupt It Yourself. You can ask him questions. And if you did come here to ask any 96 boards questions, we do have some engineers here in the channel as well to answer those questions. I have a bunch of my own, and I know Sahaj here as well does, but I'm going to go down the list here. So why disrupt it yourself? I read on your profile, you say you're into 3D printing and disruptive tools. So I'm kind of curious, how you classify what is a disruptive tool and also kind of why disrupt it yourself? Where did this come from?
Sure, yeah. So originally, I went through a few different names, but when I only had a couple hundred followers, and they were, more willing to be along for the ride of me changing my name every couple months. But I landed on Disrupt It Yourself because I think it captures this important junction between just the normal DIY stuff that I love to do and something more meaningful where your projects, have an impact at least on your own life or potentially a business, right? I feel like I want those two worlds to combine. And really the idea with Disrupt It Yourself is that, and this sounds super grandiose and it's way beyond anything I've really lived up to yet, but it's a vision, right? The idea is that you find a need in the world and you use the tools that are available to us now to accomplish that. And when you really look around the community, there's a lot of that going on. A lot of people saying, or for example, I remember listening just the other day to a story about a girl who's like 14 years old, and she's learning to program so she can help her grandma with her Alzheimer's. Just writing a program to like help, really a quality of life kind of thing. And programming alone, even though that's just software, maybe there's no hardware component to that, but just in general, the fact that now someone who's 14 years old and has taught themselves how to program and, accomplish something, it's really turning technology into a tool again, in the same way that, what differentiates us from the animals, right, is the tools. And for some reason, in the last 20 years, in the public consciousness, we've turned technology from a tool into most times entertainment, and at best something that geniuses use. And the whole vibe for Disrupt It Yourself is supposed to be more like empowering normal people to realize that there are tools out there that you can use and you can do cool stuff with it, and you can accomplish something real and valuable, not just playing retro games. So I see people post, and I do a lot of that, right? But I'll see people post like, oh, there's this new Pi, as if like people have just tied the Raspberry Pi to like retro gaming, which is a shame. But just in general, it's like there are tools out there that like all these communities and like the efforts that companies like you guys put into making it accessible. And there's all different degrees of it. Someone who is really just a software guy who just programs can so easily buy a dev board like one of yours and use his software skills and all of a sudden be able to interface with the real world. I think that's disruptive in a way that I don't think we've seen something like that since maybe the internet first started. And because it's tangible and it's physical, like with the IoT stuff, I feel like it has the potential to blow the power of the e-commerce kind of web 2.0 stuff out of the water, because we can do real things now.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You know, when it comes to 3D printing, my dad still doesn't believe they exist. You know, I've shown him videos, and he's like, "How can you make something out of nothing? That doesn't make sense." And he watches the video, and he's like, "No, that's like he thinks it's a fake movie or something." And he's an older guy, right? He might be in the call right now. Let's see. Okay, no, he left. But yeah, so you're right though. It is amazing to see. You know, you mentioned this 14-year-old girl that's creating something to solve an Alzheimer's problem. This is a new age, and you know, you have this tangible technology at your fingertips. What will we do with it? It's good that you're kind of trying to point people into the right directions.
Well, I hope to. I think we're still in the early stages. I hope 10, 15 years down the line, I'll be able to say that Disrupt It Yourself really did that.
Yeah, you will be. You will be. Let's stay positive. The world is a scary place, right? Watching this anime, My Hero Academia. I don't know if anyone watched that, but you know, you have villains and heroes, and you know, use your power for good. So now, I'll let Sahaj. Sahaj, did you want to go up with a question here?
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, one of the things is that 3D printing is fairly complicated, and what sort of the advice that you would give to beginners that can prevent them from that can help them to avoid some of the more obvious pitfalls that comes with 3D printing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I hope there's kind of a Moore's law to the ease of use for 3D printers, and that they're just going to exponentially get easier and easier to use. But at the same time, I'm also one of the first people to doubt that. And this kind of actually feeds into something that I've wanted to talk about for a while. So this might be a good kind of opportunity to bring it up. But the community that has embraced 3D printing is really this community, right? Mostly hardware hackers and electrical engineers. A lot of times retired electrical engineers that wanted to, get back into it, or kids who, want to be engineers one day. And because of that, the community, I think, it's a very hard-working group of people who are really willing to contribute so above and beyond what you would normally expect from them. And I think because of that, our threshold for ease of use is maybe a little bit too low, in that we accept way too much bad design. And I think a lot of companies, or even like I worked for a company that made 3D printers, and I thought they were great products, but in general, I'd say there's not really a lot of that mentality, with a few exceptions. And I could probably plug a few of my favorite companies later on. But most companies that are making 3D printers, I don't think are really trying super hard to make them easy to use. And the ones that are doing it in a way that is so prohibits creativity so much that it's kind of hard to find. I think when 3D printers will really get easier to use, it'll be when kind of in the same way apps made the smartphone market take off. I think once there's a better utility in the market for 3D printers, then I think it'll force more manufacturers to be more, facilitate that kind of thing more. Because right now, the people who make good 3D printers, they make them for nerds like us. So I don't feel they care that much. I mean, they care, but.
So Andrew, now, there was a time when I was helping this, a friend of mine with a startup. He was building this Rubik's Cube solving robot called Ruku, R-U-K-U. And you've seen Ruku. So half of the robot was 3D printed, the claws, the different levers and everything. Now, I was printing these parts out at my house 24 hours a day for weeks. We bought a Dremel from Home Depot, the Dremel 3D printer. That printer seemed pretty easy to use. Now, I've been told by a lot of people that printer is crap. Right now, since then, I haven't owned another printer, but I'm kind of wondering, so you say, people who are making these really good 3D printers, they're making them for nerds, and these most likely do not have they have a strong barrier to entry, a high barrier of entry. But you know, what differentiates the quality of these good 3D printers and this Dremel that I thought was I was able to just plug it in and get going, you know?
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because another unpopular opinion I have is that Dremel makes some really good 3D printers.
I like it, yeah.
One of my favorite 3D printers that I've got right now is Dremel's latest 3D printer, the Digilab 3D45. They're actually kind of starting to focus on that kind of segment of the market more. They've got a laser cutter coming out soon. And I tried their last one, the 3D40, which was PLA only. And this one is actually, they can do PLA, ABS, nylon, and supposedly more later on. And I think this kind of feeds back into the same question about the market kind of being mostly full of nerds who are very engineering minded. This is coming from a nerd, so I'm not judging. But I think the problem is most of the nerds will see a product like that from Dremel and they'll think, this is not for us. This is not true 3D printing because, you know, it's not built on kind of this rep backbone. So it's not always out of the box compatible with every open source piece of software they want to use. And this is the bigger one for the Dremel that turned some of those people off in my community, which is that technically it's not compatible with third-party material, which is not really true. You can use third-party material with it, but you void your warranty. Of course, I'm the kind of person who voids warranties habitually, so
you're saying
really
like
bother me.
Third-party spools?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying.
That's why people get turned off to it, because they want to be able to use anything and everything. And at the same time, I agree with them. And I think the problem is we get into kind of this whole world of trying to fit a new product into an existing market, you know, and the companies that are out there that are willing to manufacture a 3D printer that already have that kind of manufacturing scale that they can really knock it out of the park, they're used to old models. And of course, unfortunately, the misnomer that is 3D printing lends itself really well to a market that's already infamous for planned obsolescence, making paper printers that die on you after a few years because they're designed to, and that have really high cost for the consumables, like the material. And that's one of the things with like DRM. People want to DRM filament so that you can't use a material that isn't from the manufacturer. And because Dremel uses NFC chips, people feel like it's a DRM kind of printer, and it's definitely a little bit more in that direction, just because they sell their own material, and technically your warranty only covers using their material. So if it gets clogged with a third-party material, then you're kind of screwed. But I mean, I use third-party material day and night on their machines, and someday I'll get in trouble for it because I did a review for them, but I love them. I can't not do it. The printer's so good, and it handles other material just fine. So I just assume the risk of one day, you know, not being able to get it serviced, which is a bummer. So that comes back, I think, to the beginning, which is I think most of the companies who are willing to make a machine like that, like Dremel, they're still not ready to meet us in the middle, you know, because there really isn't a market that would facilitate it, like the App Store for 3D printing. I would love to see companies like Moen and Kenmore, and, you know, companies that make sprinkler parts and all sorts of household items and toys that could turn this on its head and say, you know what, let's switch our business model so that we can provide a 3D model for someone and they can just print a replacement part and pay us a little fee to use the model. That's the kind of thing that people in my community would like initially want to knee-jerk like response to say, no, that's still corporate and we don't want to do that. They don't realize it's that kind of thing that really enables the technology. We kind of have to have that. And it would be great.
You bring up like such a crazy point, and I never even really, you know, it's crazy. I never thought about it this way, but everyone would want to own a 3D printer if that were the case. I mean, like you look at like say like a user interface with, you know, let's just keep using Dremel as the example, but you look at like a user interface for Dremel, you know, say a screen as big as your phone screen, capable of connecting to the internet, capable of downloading applications, then these companies could create apps for Dremel. So like you said, like, you know, here in San Diego, we have Hunter sprinklers or Hunter something about sprinkler systems. So like you want to, you know, replace, like you said, a sprinkler head, you go download the Hunter app, pay 99 cents, and then you can just print that replacement part. That can apply to so many things.
I think when the 3D printing craze was just getting on, this was one of the biggest arguments for, you know, investing in a 3D printer is like for this particular use to, you know, make replacement parts for your you know, like household items or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely was. The only problem is currently the state of things, you'd have to design it yourself. And companies like Stratasys, once they bought MakerBot, kind of rode that wave of hype about being able to print replacement parts and, you know, print toys for your kids, without really realizing that we weren't quite there and that we didn't have the kind of the back end to support that. And they really flooded the market with that hype and with their product. And unfortunately, people bought MakerBots and didn't like them, and they returned them. And I think that kind of created, I think historically, what we'll look back on as a period in 3D printing's history that's a lot like that first death of the home video game console market, where like people tried too hard and they were too expensive and just didn't quite do enough for all of us. So there's kind of like that first push where it's like, okay, this is possible. Same thing probably with VR, right? This could really work. And you can kind of start to see the promise of it. You can get your, you know, you can really wet your palate with the first test of the first 3D printers. They look really good and you can imagine what they could do. But because it's just more of a proof of concept, companies like threw too much money at it and the consumer didn't get what they were promised. So a lot of people left kind of with a sour taste in their mouth. And now I think we're finally starting to get back into our second opportunity to make that happen. And I think it'll still probably be, you know, at least another 5 years before we really start to see the whole market develop, because it's not just about making good 3D printers. There's a lot of great 3D printers already. And it's just a complex thing that I think has a lot of moving parts, and it just really needs to get the right people, the right companies, and the right use cases proven before it'll really take off.
If I had the space at my house, I would have, you know, multiple 3D printers. I think that my girlfriend would hate it because they're still pretty loud. At least, you know, actually she finds them loud. I find them reasonable.
Your cats would hate it.
My cats would probably like it. They'd be chasing the little nozzle around. But yeah, so I mean, like, yeah, 3D printers, hopefully eventually it just becomes, you know, an everyday thing for most people, just like your phone. You know, I don't see why not. You know, also you have people like in MIT who are developing ways to do 3D food printing, right? I mean, that's insane. You're printing out food. That's Star Trek. Right? I mean, that's
the medical industry. Right. They're printing kidneys and like cartilage and stuff like that. The technology is so universal that, you know, we really did ourselves a disservice when companies tried to push it as a way to print toys for their kids. You know, there's just so much application for it out there. And really, right now, the technology is already mature in the sense that it's enabling entrepreneurs to, you know, prototype their products a lot quicker and cheaper than they ever could before. So it's already making an impact that is more behind the scenes. Like I save people locally thousands of dollars just because I've got so many 3D printers now that I can print stuff for people that, you know, let's say you're a young startup and you've got a product and maybe you've only got financially one shot at making it happen. So if you go and do your prototype and then go to tool and make your molds and there's some defects, you might be out of money. You might not get a second chance. But if you have a 3D printer, you can iterate on that design, you know, 20 times over without spending very much money so that you're really sure. So like it's already making an impact. It's just not to the consumer market as much, or at least it's kind of in between.
So when you're developing your files, say your STL files or the files that you're using to print with, what's your preferred method? Like what programs are you using?
Yeah, so now after a few years, my main program that I do my 3D modeling in is Fusion 360. from Autodesk. Fusion 360 is a really cool product, and hobbyists and students can use it for free, fortunately. And it's amazing, really, what it's capable of. I started out using an even more simple and less feature-rich product from them that was called 123D Design. Very basic. Now that I'm using Fusion 360, I think unless you have very specific needs, if you're just kind of a normal person designing, some product or a project, something simple, you can do everything that you would do in SolidWorks with Fusion 360. And that's a big asterisk, right? Because I'm saying if you're designing a car or an airplane or all the other crazy things that people use SolidWorks for, of course, it's worth the thousands of dollars that they put into it. But normal people who aren't designing something that needs to have a visualized stress test, and there's a lot of that stuff you still can do with Fusion, but for even if you wanted to pay for it, like if you were a professional, I think it's like $300 for a license, which is a chunk of change if you have to pay for it, but nothing compared to the several $1,000s you can spend on SolidWorks. Yeah, I really recommend it.
Cool. Yeah, no, I definitely will look into that. And it brings me, I have one more thing to talk about, a couple more questions, but I did want to ask you about something else later. I saw on your story, I think it was yesterday or today, maybe this morning, that you will be featured in Make Magazine. It's true?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm looking for a teaser on your article.
Okay. So I've actually got 2 articles coming up, one in this issue and I think one in the next one. They're little articles, and I could talk your ear off all day, so I won't go into it too much. But one of the other things that has really gotten me going in the maker community is just networking. So I was at Maker Faire New York last year, and somehow a friend, at the time I was working for Dish Technologies, and a friend at work, one of his friends was their video guy for the actual company. And I was like, that's crazy. I'm going to Maker Faire in a month. And he's like, oh, cool. Let me give you my friend's number. So there was a little mixer one day after the event. And I'm up there at this bar in a Chinese part of New York, the most bizarre setting I've ever been in, just chatting with all these nerds in a Chinese bar. And one of the guys, the friend of a friend, I'm just kind of talking to him about Maker stuff. I'm like, dude, it's so cool that you work for Make. Kind of this rite of passage for a lot of people to do work for Make Magazine. And I was like, man, I just love for a chance to do an article. And he just tells me, oh, you should talk to her. And I was like, who? He's like, yeah, my friend here. She's right behind you. She's been listening to us talk for the last hour or whatever. And I turned and there's this awesome 5'0" lady behind me who's just got the biggest smile on her face, and she was super sweet and cool and totally eating up all the nerdy stuff I was saying. And I was like, oh, you're the person that I need to talk to. Can I write an article for Make Magazine? And she's like, yeah, sure. So that's the serendipitous way that it happened. So it's been, I guess, almost a year now, because we talked about the kind of things I was interested in, and we kind of just brainstormed a little. And I gave her a few ideas, and there were 2 that she liked. So they were projects that I'd been working on. And the first one is ironically retro gaming related. So if you scroll back, you might find a few projects that I've done, one more recently. So talking about how that one was and just the experience of putting it together and the novelty of it. And it's short. So I'm kind of trying to bust my hump to show Make Magazine that I can write cool articles, so that maybe down the line I can write some full page articles. But for now, yeah, they're just kind of 2 or 3 paragraph things, and want to kind of get my name out there, because as you can tell, I have no trouble articulating my thoughts.
Yeah, no, so, absolutely. I'm stoked on this. Like I said, this has been a great interview so far. Yeah.
Yeah, so I might as well do the same thing and just write it all down. Get paid.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so Make Magazine, I should say Make Magazine, but maker communities in general. I was just up at the Maker Faire in San Francisco. I'd love to get to go to the Maker Faire in New York. We'll see. But make communities are amazing. The people there are just so great. Yeah, and like you're saying, you were having a conversation with someone at the bar. They at Maker Fairs, they usually have these events. People some of the companies on the floor, they'll end up throwing these little special events, or people will all gather and meet somewhere. And like you said, everyone's just happy, smiling, enjoying each other's company, and talking about tech and making stuff.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
So much enthusiasm. And I think it all stems from that. It's just like people who and for me, for example, I'm someone who grew up with ADD and had a really hard time in school. I always felt like I was kind of dumb for some reason, even though everyone told me I was smart. And I think that's a lot of people like me who have always been way too creative and always just wanted to do stuff and get their hands on something new. And all of a sudden they found a community of people who make cool things on their own. And I think that's a really powerful thing to bring people together.
Yeah, does anyone else in the call have questions for Andrew here? I don't know if we've been talking a lot. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I have another one. So I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of DIY 3D printers as well, and people like to tinker with even if a unit isn't DIY. So in terms of controllers, would you prefer something like a single board computer like a Pi, or more Arduino like, or something that's very dedicated controller, especially built for a 3D printer? So just want to know your preferences on that.
Yeah, I think honestly we're at a stage where we should move away from having so much Arduino in our 3D printers, because now there's software out there that can really plan toolpaths in such a sophisticated way that Arduino really can't handle. Arduino was, it very much enabled a lot of the early affordable 3D printers, and some early and still some 3D printers you might grab off of eBay will just be like an Arduino Mega with a motor driver shield on top. And they work, and it allowed us to get a lot done, but I want to see it evolve more. So I think the 3D printers that I've most liked over the last few years have definitely moved into kind of that higher end, more like 32-bit kind of segment of, proper SoCs that are running more sophisticated tool paths, and just enable a little bit better quality and less jitteriness, and have a lower propensity for failure. So yeah, I definitely think I'd like to see the Arduino stuff kind of dissolve away. Arduino has its place. It had its place in my history as a maker, but I'm happy to see more sophisticated boards coming onto the market. There's like a smoothie board, I think, which is one of the early ones that had a lot more beef behind it, and I've only heard good things about them. It's more expensive, sure, but I think 3D printers, sometimes you get what you pay for anyway, so there's no reason to skimp on the most important part of the 3D printer. So.
On that point also, right? You're taking an Arduino, you kill a lot of the potential functionality, right? I mean, when you're using a proper SoC with the power that you can get, I mean, you open up the chance of offering video monitoring systems, cloud communications, yeah. IoT, to its core, right? So I mean, yeah. What was it? We did a show with UC Robotics, another OpenHours. We've done several with them, but they use the Bubblegum 96, so one of these 96 boards, to basically monitor an entire room of 3D printers. They've done it to run 3D printers, and then not only that, they monitor them, and then they also control them from anywhere in the world. So you could basically have 40 printers running on a Bubblegum 96, something like that. Well, they do, I think, 10 per board, and then you can set your file, you can watch it being built, you can do everything with it. And so now people are going to be able to run, full-blown 3D printing labs to fabricate, large quantities of products.
Yeah, and I think the problem is right now people are trying to accomplish that with 3D printers that are driven with an Arduino and some of kind of this classic Marlin firmware, very basic and kind of cluttered, honestly, at this point, and supplementing that with something like a Raspberry Pi. And that's cool as an open source project, but like I kind of said a minute ago, I just feel like there's a better way to do it. And starting off with the right hardware instead of trying to have the adventure of making your Raspberry Pi talk you know, synchronously with an Arduino. We all know, like with products like the Arduino Yun, that you can make it happen, but it's not always easy to make Linux and Arduino talk. And you just introduce more, you know, like I said, propensity for errors. And that's, none of us want to spend all of our time troubleshooting our 3D printer or its hardware. We just want our prints to turn out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Andrew, I want to give you a chance. Like, I don't know if you want to talk about any of your favorite 3D printers? I know you said earlier that you said, oh, later I might plug some of my favorite 3D printers. Did
Sure.
you want to do that? It's up to you.
Yeah, real quick. I mean, I talked about the Dremel. The Dremel's one that I have a high opinion of. I feel like I should let them know that I gave them some love, but they'll probably get mad at me for using third-party material. So we'll let them discover that if they want to. Another one that I've really been enjoying is the BCM 3D Sigma. They're from Spain. It's a high-end machine, and I feel like where they're at right now, they're one of the companies that's doing a better job of user friendliness. It's always hard because, like, now that I have experience, it's probably harder to know, you know, how easy it would be for someone who's new. So that would be a perspective I'd love to get. Maybe you guys need to get a Sigma at some point. But they're amazing because they have independent extruders. You can have one extruder printing, and then when you need to print with the next material, it moves over and parks, and then the other one comes out and does its job. Dual extrusion is really useful. I won't get into that because I could talk about that for another 30 minutes, but it's a really valuable addition for this kind of 3D printing that I do, which is FDM, diffuse deposition modeling, where it does layer by layer with hot plastic. That second material allows you, and for me it's mostly this, use dissolvable material. You can do supports that dissolve away in water. Love that. Or in with ABS, there's a chemical that'll dissolve hip supports and stuff. It's super cool, and it's hard to do. Not many 3D printer manufacturers have done a good job with multi-material printing, and it's kind of, I think, the next frontier, and a lot of companies are forging into that. And that's kind of my focus this year with reviewing 3D printers, is trying to get my hands on the companies that are taking a new approach to multi-material. And I've got another review coming up later this year for a product that does that as well. It allows you to print 4 materials. It's called the Palette by Mosaic Manufacturing. So yeah, I mean, right now between the Dremel and the Sigma, those are kind of the two that I love the most. I've got a few others that are decent at basic 3D printers, and they're good to kind of get started. But as far as like cutting edge that really add value, the Dremel, because I can crank out ABS prints and nylon prints all day and night and not have warping. I think people are crazy for overlooking it, because there's just not too many printers anywhere near that price range that can do that. So yeah, those both get my stamp of approval.
Nice, cool. Okay, so yeah, when I end up buying mine, I'm pretty sure I'll get an update from you so I can get the perfect one. Now, some questions are. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Andrew. I have a couple of points to ask Andrew.
Sure.
Could you characterize the printers or your list of favorites in terms of mechanical accuracy? And in the second option will be the quality of finish that you see, because it's a consequence of the first, but for me, there are important factors to consider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are multiple factors that contribute to that. The hardware is part of it, and the software as well, right? How well it can plan your tool paths. And then there's even a configuration element physically, which is the way your 3D printer is calibrated for movement. Because even if your tool paths are really well generated, your hardware can handle it. If your 3D printer isn't calibrated properly and it tries to accelerate too quickly, then you'll get artifacts. There's really, unfortunately, and that's why troubleshooting a 3D printer is so hard. There's so many pieces to it. There are different motion systems as well for moving, the extruder around. There are 3D printers that move the bed up and down, or 3D printers that move the whole gantry up and down, and they all have their pros and cons. There's systems that use different configurations of the belt. it's really hard. And honestly, as much as I like to think I've got a really good grasp on everything that's out there, I really don't yet. I've only been able to use maybe 10, 12 3D printers, and I've tried to, get my hands on different styles and configurations. So a lot of them are similar, and some of them are more unique and offer more accuracy. There's like HBot, which is a similar configuration. There's so much you can get into it, but just kind of dealing with the way the motors and the belts work to move that extruder around, and how that affects the motion of the extruder so that you can get really accurate prints. And because I haven't used them all, I can't speak to it. And that's kind of what my crusade is as a social media 3D printing and DIY guy, is I need to have that opportunity, and I'm so grateful to the companies who let me borrow their 3D printers to review, because as much as I just want to review it, I also just need to get my hands on it. And I don't have, as much as I wish I did, piles and piles of money to just burn on 3D printers. I really do rely on these companies to give me a chance to get experience with it. So I think it'll still be a while before I can really say, like, this is the most accurate way to accomplish high resolution 3D printing, but I'm just not quite there yet. But yeah, I mean, I've seen everything from the $400 3D printers, and if you're really clever and you're good at calibrating it, you can get a certain level of quality. And then more expensive 3D printers that right out of the box can get that quality or better. It's hard to quantify.
Yeah.
So I hope that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I joined later, so I don't know if he mentioned that before, but you are obviously investing a lot of time in this testing and research. Are you putting that the results of that research in some sort of list or qualification, or at least on
So that's actually I'm glad you bring that up, because I've been kind of throwing around. I have my own information, and a lot of times one of the things I do when I reach out to a company is I'll kind of tell them that part of the value that I want to provide is giving them feedback, but that tends to be more internal. So I'll say, hey, let me review your 3D printer. I'll do a social media for exposure, and then I'll also give you a report when you're done. Because my full-time job is QA, so I'm kind of used to that world of running something through a gambit of tests and getting the results, and then giving it a good write-up, and do all the cool little graphics to just kind of quantify everything. So I've tended to do that more internally with companies that I've worked with. But along with what you're saying, I have had the idea for a long time to kind of also turn Disrupt It Yourself into a bit of kind of a stamp of approval, or kind of get my own like Metacritic type thing for 3D printers. And maybe if I, yeah, exactly. So you can say Disrupt It Yourself approved, or who knows if anyone, never mind. Someday people will want to do that. I like your positivity. So
of course.
If I can elevate the brand of Disrupt Yourself to that point where people would be enthusiastic about wanting to earn like some kind of approval from Disrupt It Yourself, and maybe that means bringing more people under that roof, so I can have multiple people testing, and we can agree on a specific way of reviewing the 3D printers and give them a score that really has. It's not just like, I really like this, so I'm going to give it an 8.5. No, but like there's specific criteria, because I kind of do that on my own for companies, but I focus mostly on user experience. I think I need to spend more time on that, because it is something I've had, bouncing around in my head as something that would have a lot more long-term value for Disrupt It Yourself as a brand, and more value to my followers, because then they could really have a reason to come back every time I do a review, because they could know what kind of criteria I use and how well a 3D printer scored, and that would allow you to compare it. But yeah, maybe I just need to get some other smart friends to work with me that can help me do that better.
So, but currently you're not hosting your reviews anywhere, like for the 12 printers that you said you've worked on?
Yeah, so I've done YouTube videos over the last like year to year and a half. Of course, I post a lot of things. I have a website, but I haven't really gotten to the point where I'm writing a lot for my website. I started working with a company for a while that does reviews, Aniwa, but they're international, and we just had a hard time, I think, working together because of the long distance and for different reasons. But who knows? And I mean, I would definitely be interested in making something like that work. It just requires some kind of meta. Like I need to sit down and like plan things out and decide how I want to do it. And unfortunately, this is the sad part of it all, is I have a day job, which I'm escaping from for a little break right now. But and a family, so I like to come home and spend time with them. So what I get done sometimes is in the wee hours of the night or on the weekends when I can justify leaving them to their own devices. So yeah, it's a slow process evolving Disrupt Yourself into something I think more and more valuable, but I think the trend is upward. So
Awesome.
Keep an eye on me.
Yeah. So Andrew, we have, like, while we were talking right now with Guillermo's question, we have, I think, 7 or so questions that popped up in the chat.
Okay.
We have roughly, I mean, I don't know how long you have, I know you have to get back to work. So if you have time, feel free to spend as much time as you want on these questions. Otherwise, there's about 8 minutes left before the top of the hour. So maybe we can knock out as many.
I probably have about 8 minutes left until my laptop dies even. So let's just see what we can do.
Let's get these knocked out. So first one, this is from Haitao Zhang. Haitao, this is actually from UC Robotics, the people who make the Bubblegum 96, as well as the people who are doing that 3D printing software. First question, any open source SLA, SLS printer like Formlabs?
Open source. I'm not familiar with any that are completely open source, but I also honestly have focused mostly on FFF, FDM. So I'm honestly a lightweight when it comes to SLA.
Actually, now I have to interrupt. I think there is one, and I've met the co-founder, Alif Objects, with their Lulzbot, and Jeff Moe. Are you familiar with any of those?
I'm familiar with Lulzbot, yeah, but do they have an SLA machine?
I don't know about SLA. I know they're either 100% or near 100% open source.
Yes.
Both open source software and open source.
Yeah, definitely. So Lulzbot, they do the Taz line of 3D printers, and they have the Lulzbot Mini. They are definitely, if there's any company out there making any kind of 3D printer, they're the most open source of them all. I think they even use open source software. I think they do documentation with open source. Like, they're very hardcore open source, so they get serious props for all of that.
Cool, yeah, and so Todd did share some links later on in the chat that anyone who's interested can go check that out for the Lulzbot. Thanks, Todd. Next question is, how do you like fully open sourced 3D printers like Ultimaker, VCN with dual extruders?
So I don't know if that's maybe a 2-part question. Is it like how do I feel about fully open source 3D printers? I don't know that the Ultimaker is fully open source, or at least I don't think they release all of their designs as soon as a new printer comes up. I could be wrong. The Ultimaker is great. It's on my list of 3D printers, like the Ultimaker 3 that came out this year, I think. It's on my list of machines that I want to try because they have a novel approach to multi-material. They have like a single extruder with 2 nozzles. Well, it's a dual extruder, right? But one of the nozzles actually retracts a little bit when it's printing with the other. So that's one machine that I'm pretty desperate to get my hands on, but I haven't used it. So I'm hoping that I can convince them to send me an Ultimaker 3 to play with sometime. And then I'll have a better answer.
Absolutely. All right. Next one. Any comments about very low price, open sourced yet, but sounds popular 3D printers like Creality? Oh, there's an I missing there. Okay. I thought I was reading it bad. Creality CR10. So any comments about the very low priced, not open sourced Creality CR10?
I've got a CR10, and I think in the world of low cost 3D printers, there's something to be said for them. They're not without their issues, but for the price, you can get a lot of mileage out of it. So I think someone who is a little technically capable, they're not going to have to tinker with it as much as some of the really cheap 3D printers like the A-Nets out there that are like all acrylic and just super dirt cheap. I think if you spend, your $400-500 on a CR10, and that's all the money you have to spend, you can do a lot and, really have a good time with the CR10 and get some mileage out of it.
Cool. Another one from Hightail. All those were from Hightail, by the way. Another one from Hightail is, how big do you think the gap between open source slicing software like Cura and proprietary slicers like Simplify 3D?
The gap is narrowing. So I was a big, and am still a big supporter of Simplify 3D. Big fan of kind of their user experience with their software, just the way things are organized. I've used it basically since I started using a 3D printer, which is funny. I think my first machine must have been, $400 or $500, and that software alone's another $150. So some people will criticize it because you could get another super cheap 3D printer almost for that much. But there's still some things they do really well. And the one staple for me is the fact that you can manually define your support material. You can choose exactly where it goes. And instead of trying to play around with auto-generating support material, which can be hit and miss. So I still have it for that reason. But I don't feel like they've been adding new valuable features as quickly as they used to. And Cura, ironically, I was pretty anti-Cura for forever, and I still have some pretty big complaints. It's pretty slow. It's missing some of those features that Simplify 3D has, but they've also picked up the pace like crazy. It's actually an open source project from Ultimaker. They own Cura. It's their software, but it's gained some serious ground, and it has now some of its own features that Simplify 3D doesn't. So yeah, to kind of answer your question, the gap is narrowing, and for me, honestly, if it weren't for a few features, I wouldn't need Simplify 3D as much as I used to. I could almost get by with Cura if it weren't for that manual support stuff. Who knows?
Nice, Ben. You know your stuff. You haven't been stumped on anything yet. Okay, so this one's from Todd, and he wants to know. We have two more. What does Andrew think of Alif Objects?
Yeah, so they're the company that does those open source. They do the LOLs bot. So we kind of talked about that a little bit. I've heard not great things about the TAS 6, which came out a long time ago now. I'm guessing they're working on a new machine and hopefully will work out the issues they had. The TAS 5 I heard was really good. And I've actually heard their Mini, the LulzBot Mini, is their most reliable printer to date. It's a smaller one, but if you only mostly print enclosures, like a lot of us spend 90% of our time is just printing enclosures and parts for electronics projects, you could totally get by with a Mini like that. I've heard that's a great machine.
Cool. Last question on here, it looks like, and then we'll do some closing real quick, hopefully before your battery dies. Andrew, have you? And this is from Da Zhu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who also, praised the interview. He says the interview is going great so far. He says, Andrew, have you played with deltas and trinamic ICs?
So I actually have really wanted to work with deltas for a long time. When I was at Maker Faire, I approached a couple of the bigger companies doing deltas at the moment. Like See Me CNC, they're kind of the biggest name, I think, in the Delta 3D printing world. And I came really close. I don't know why things fell apart. I thought I was going to get a hold of one of their machines to review. I did get kind of a funny little, that sounds mean, because someone worked really hard to make it. But I have a small Delta machine, and I'm having a serious brain fart right now because I can't even think. Oh, BQ. It could be BQ. It's BIQU. They have a little Delta called the Magician. And I so have wanted to play with a Delta of any kind for a long time. So I got in touch with them, and they were able to send me one to play with. It's a different approach, of course, to 3D printing because it doesn't manipulate Cartesian coordinates. It just has, 3 pillars, and it moves the arms up and down, and the effector moves in, Delta coordinates. And I'm sure there's pros and cons. I just haven't spent enough time with Deltas yet because there aren't that many companies making Delta machines. And the ones that do apparently don't think I'm cool. So I haven't been able to convince someone to send me a decent Delta machine to play with. And for the same reason as well, I'm not as familiar with their electronics or their firmware because I haven't had that opportunity to dig into them like I would with, another machine. So feel free to go tweet at CMeCNC and tell them to send Disrupt It Yourself a 3D printer review, and then I'd be happy to give you some more insight. That's my official response for now.
Andrew, Dazu just posted in the chat. He says, I can send you a machine if you want one, Andrew.
Dang. Okay.
Hey. All right. So
there we
what
go.
I'll do, Andrew, is I'll give him my email address, and then I'll hook you two up together. All right.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Andrew, can you post your contact info, your email? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. So Da, if you're interested, you can actually just get a hold of Andrew directly. He'll be posting his info in the, there you go, disruptityourself at Gmail. How much battery do you have left?
Let's see. I'm currently at 10%.
Oh,
it has
okay,
the little danger symbol on it.
Let's answer Todd's questions. I'm sorry, everyone who's still watching. If you have more questions lined up, we're going to do these last. Is these last two questions okay, Andrew?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go for
last two questions from Todd, and then we're going to close out. But here we go, Todd. Two huge markets or questions about usage markets. Two huge markets that have become totally closed and proprietary is agricultural products, examples, tractors, combines, implements, and automotive. Does Andrew know of projects helping to make A and B accessible?
Agriculture, I haven't seen too much. I mean, the most agricultural projects I've seen deal with like doing your own, what do they call it? Like urban farming stuff. And I've seen like robotics that do farming. That's the most 3D printing related thing I've seen there. But as far as automotive, I mean, I've definitely seen projects around recycling automotive parts for filament, and that's it. I mean, I might have to, you may have found one that stumps me a bit. I'll have to do some more research in those two areas. I follow a bunch of blogs that post a lot of articles across the whole span of the 3D printing world, and that's one that I don't feel like I've seen too much about. And maybe that just means that somebody needs to, kind of break some ground there, ironically.
Andrew, this is Todd. I'm a generation wedgie. I'm not as old as Mad Dog, and I'm not as young as you as Robert. But I remember the days. I remember seeing it. Farmers in the field, tractor breaks down. They would actually effing work on it or jury rig or make a part themselves. Same with automotive. Nobody can do that anymore. And today's modern tractors, when you're down during harvest season, you're looking at $10,000 to $25,000 an hour in combine charged rent time. So they have to wait till a part flies in from John Deere, and it's insane.
Yeah, I'm actually glad Guillermo here is mentioning Jay Leno. Jay Leno is really big on 3D printing parts for his classic cars that he fixes up. I'm pretty sure even on his show he's talked about it a little bit. So I think there is a bit of that going on. I mean, I know, who was it? A big auto manufacturer uses a bunch of Ultimakers, I think, even for some of their manufacturing more. I think it's like making jigs for their automated manufacturing processes. They'll use like little 3D printed pieces that can stick in so they can mount a bunch of parts. But yeah, you're right. It seems like people in that area who are really tied, and that kind of goes back to the home stuff too. These companies have created a business for themselves around charging a ton for tiny little parts. And I think that's really sad. The problem is in a lot of those worlds, we can only get away with parts that we can use that are made out of plastic. And there are metal 3D printers, but they require like inert gases and metal powders. So not too many farmers are going to have lab equipment, I think. But anything that you can 3D print out of plastic, and if somebody's familiar enough with agriculture and can identify the most valuable things that could be made on a 3D printer in that world, I think there could be really cool projects around facilitating that kind of thing. And I'll bet farmers, as technological as they become in the last generation, I think a lot of them would be happy to pick up anything that would save them that much money. I'm sure you'll agree.
There is one more question. I've seen people 3D print normal, like a wood feel material or metal feel material from regular 3D printer from spools. How does that work?
Yeah, so they'll use a binder and a metal powder, but it's really just an aesthetic thing. And in fact, they're less structurally sound than plastic, because when you're printing with plastic, it's a homogeneous material. It's completely one material, so it interfaces well with itself. When you're printing with these metal powders, or even some of the carbon fiber, and some people will argue with me on this, because apparently there are some good carbon fiber composites out there that are like nylon and carbon fiber, but for the most part, most of the composite materials available for FDM printing are more of an aesthetic effect than a practical value. They're fun, they look cool, but they're not going to make your parts as strong as metal or carbon fiber. There is one company out there that makes a really cool 3D printer called the Mark I, and Mark Forge, I think is the name of them. They 3D print with a normal, like a nylon or another, plastic, and then it has like a special extruder that actually feeds either Kevlar or carbon fiber and maybe even some other stuff as it prints, so it can embed these continuous strands. Those, I think, would be super valuable in that industry, in either of these industries as well, just because they're a lot stronger. But yeah, the metal powder stuff is fun, and I've made some pretty stuff for my wife for, Valentine's Day or something, but it's not really going to give you strong stuff that you want to use in an application that requires metal.
I've seen a machine that prints 3D out of powder metal, and then goes into an oven that fuses the metal. And that's a similar process as sintering, that use pressure and heat to fuse the metal in one solid piece. I think that's the future for that.
I think you're definitely right. And there's one company in particular that I think they may have recently had an IPO. I can't remember exactly, but there's at least one big company out in the industry right now that's trying to forge ahead, really making 3D metal desktop printing a thing. But because that's a new frontier, I would expect it to be a few years before those are really available to businesses, and then probably at least a decade before any of us are going to be printing metal at home. But that's fine, because most of the people who would want to do this would be willing to drop, $10,000 on a machine that can crank out metal parts day and night. That's super valuable.
That one goes to the six figures, so probably aim to the service bureau type of operation.
Exactly. Yep, definitely. And that's good too.
Great. Okay, so this was awesome. This was so much fun, Andrew. I hope everyone's okay with this, but we do have to shut it down. We've gone about 10 minutes over the hour. It is usually an hour-long broadcast. That's why. So, Andrew, you get the last word before I go into the closing announcements. So, is there anything you'd like to say at the end?
Well, I guess for me, it's just I really want to see more people who have the technical expertise and get involved with even more of the physical, like I also work with CNC machines, but 3D printers, because guys like you have a lot to contribute. I'm just learning to program and get into some of that other stuff. I'd love to learn to design PCBs, but there's a lot that people with more of the technical ability can really contribute to this community that's starting to become, and I don't mean this to be derogatory, but full of a lot of hobbyists. So the more intelligent, talented, and prepared engineers we can get into this world, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do. And I'd love to, anybody who wants to add me on Instagram, send me a message if you've got a project idea. I want to be pushed by my community. I want to find people who are smarter than me, so we can work together and I can learn from other people. That's really how I've gotten to where I am. It's not from posting pretty pictures. it's because people have found me and reached out, and I've been able to collaborate on projects, and it stretches me. So I need that. I'm hungry for that on a daily basis. So that's it. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was really fun.
Very, very nice and well said. Absolutely. Andrew, you are welcome anytime. We'd love to maybe a few months down the road, have you back on here, give us some
Please.
updates on what you've been working on. So yeah, you're always welcome on the show. So thank you so much as well for taking the time to do this. As Andrew did mention, I do want to share one last time here. Please go check out his Instagram. He's not joking. There's a lot of really cool stuff on there. He shares all the things he's working on. One in particular, the latest one was a control kind of grip for the Switch, the Nintendo Switch. I hate grabbing those little controllers. I never even thought that you could create something like this. So that's awesome. Also want to share his YouTube channel. So also take a chance, go check out his YouTube channel. He did mention that he does do reviews and share his different builds there as well. Thank you, Andrew, once again. Yeah. Yeah,
it was great. Yeah, anytime, let me know. I'm going to have to head out because my computer is really about to die. So
that's okay.
Great.
We'll catch you later. I'm gonna give announcements on next week's episode. So you take care, Andrew.
All right, you too. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, everyone who's still here, next week's episode, we will be meeting with 2 representatives from Hello Chava. So Hello Chava is an application or a program that you can use. I'm going to read off their website now, but basically it allows you to confidentially post your phone number everywhere, anywhere and everywhere. Very interesting concept. Basically what it does is it creates a separate work number for you that you can share your info with anywhere while keeping your personal number private. I tried this software out on my phone. It works, it just works. It's pretty amazing. You download the application, they give you a free trial, it creates a phone number for you, and it allows you to just text, talk, do whatever you need to do to basically keep yourself private while simultaneously not hindering your ability to communicate with the world. Now, this is perfect for people who use Instagram or any other social media because there are options to post your phone number and stuff like that. Once you start getting a bunch of telemarketing calls, just change it up, right? Anyways, we look forward to meeting with the folks from Hello Chava, which I'm going to say their names right now. It's Isaac and Meryl. So Meryl and Isaac from Hello Chava will be joining us next week. We look forward to seeing you all. Again, we'll be broadcasting live Thursday, the 19th at 4 p.m. UTC, which translates to 9 a.m. PST, 9, 10, 11, and 12 noon Eastern time. All right. Thanks again. Anyone who would like to stick around, we're going to turn off the recording slowly, and we'll head into after hours. All right. Bye, YouTube. Bye, Facebook. Bye, everyone.